Yes, definitely. I'm not Albert Einstein, but I'm pretty good. Welcome, you all. This is a MedBix webcast. We have an extraordinary guest today, Dr. Eben Alexander is a neurosurgeon, and he doesn't need introduction to a lot of circles, but some people may need in some parts of the world. So I'm going to play some of the in the ABC news that the small clip he has, and then I will talk with him in a little bit more about the consciousness. He wrote several books, and he's a neurosurgeon, Harvard trained neurosurgeon, academic doctor, and we can talk with a professor, doctor, neurosurgeon, Dr. Eben Alexander. Um, the thing is that my Bedbix webcast is basically bringing the doctors and the healthcare community in one platform and engage with them. There is no channel for other doctors. These are all, I'm bringing a different doctors and engage with them and then see what they do. And we ask us about the consciousness and our healthcare system. We can ask him all the different questions with Dr. Alexander. Okay, so I'm going to play very quick video of him, and then you can play that. You can see it. So
2020 continues. Is there proof of heaven? Once again, Elizabeth Vargas.
8 million Americans claim to have had a near-death experience, but neurosurgeon Eben Alexander never thought in 1,000 years he would be one of them.
What did you think those were?
Fantasies, hallucinations.
He was a man of science. He didn't believe in it. That is, he says, until it happened to him.
Let's talk about how you got sick. You woke up in the middle of the night feeling ill and in pain.
It was like being struck by a freight train. 4:30 in the morning, woke up, never had anything like that before. My last words to my wife, don't call 911. Trust me, I'm a doctor, it's just a muscle spasm. And I was gone.
Dr. Alexander had a rare and deadly form of bacterial meningitis which was infecting his brain. In a matter of hours, this healthy man was on death's door. By the time they got him to the hospital, he was in a coma.
So your wife was being told that you might die?
And that she would be raising our 2 boys without me.
But as his body lay in that hospital bed with no recognizable brain activity, Dr. Alexander says he had already begun an astounding journey. A journey to a place he'd said didn't exist.
Did you believe in heaven?
When I was younger, I thought a heaven and a loving God made sense, but through my academic neurosurgery career, I saw less and less that could be the case.
The journey began, he says, in a dark, formless place without memory, language, or time. But then
I was rescued from that by this spinning melody of light that came closer and opened up and was a rip in the fabric of reality that just opened up around me.
You described this world as hyper vivid.
The colors were extremely vivid with millions of butterflies. And these flowers blooming, blossoms opening as we flew by.
And by his side, an unknown presence.
There was a person guiding you, a beautiful girl, as you describe her. Tell me what she looked like.
She had a beautiful face with a wide smile and high cheekbones and absolutely gorgeous, clear blue eyes. She never said a word to me. She would look at me and the thoughts would come directly into my mind, into my awareness.
What thoughts?
And the thoughts were, you are loved, you are cherished. There's nothing you can do wrong. I always remember being told, we will teach you many things, but you'll be going back.
Back to the hospital where his wife kept her vigil and his doctors were giving up hope. On the 7th day of his coma, he opened his eyes.
It was just nothing but a miracle.
His first words, the very words he'd heard from his guide, that blue-eyed girl.
All is well. Don't worry, all is well.
Within weeks, Eben Alexander had made an astonishing full recovery.
How are you different after going through this experience?
Well, My family says I'm nicer. I
That's
would
a good
say,
thing.
It really has changed me in every way by realizing that our souls are eternal.
The book he has written, Proof of Heaven, has sparked a lot of controversy.
You know, you do have skeptics out there who are just saying it's not uncommon for people near death to have all sorts of funky things going on inside their bodies.
Well, that's why the fact that I had meningitis that was so severe, I mean, that should not have allowed for any experience. And then this with the eyes just
Alexander
shows how
maintains his brain was so completely shut down that the visions he had could simply not have been generated there. He says he wrote down everything he remembered, now in his book, before speaking to anyone, so as not to taint his memory.
You then went on to read about other people's near-death experiences. Was it striking how similar what you had written was to what they had experienced?
It was absolutely astonishing.
I really felt the white light was God.
I stopped walking and I saw my grandma.
You could see peace, you could see love.
In all the other afterlife stories, everybody told of being guided by a loved one who had died. You had as your guide a girl you'd never met.
I must say that was very haunting. Why would I go through all that and not have my father there? My father, who was a neurosurgeon, I idolized him, and he had passed over 4 years earlier. Why wasn't he there?
And why the blue-eyed girl instead? Dr. Alexander had been adopted as a child. Years later, he found his birth family, all except for one, his birth sister, who died before he met them.
Her name was Betsy.
How old was she when she died?
She was 36 years old.
So Betsy you'd never met?
I just heard what a beautiful, loving soul she was. How she worked in a rape crisis center and took care of many people who were unfortunate. And she was just a very loving, loving person.
How was it that you came to see a picture of her?
My birth sister, Kathy, had promised to send me a picture of Betsy. And it was about 4 months after my coming out of the hospital when that picture arrived.
He opened the envelope and saw it for the first time. The photo, he says, was of that blue-eyed girl from his vision.
And it was so stunning. And that picture was almost as if she's saying, "Do you get it now?" And I cannot tell you how powerful that was. There was no mistaking it. That's exactly who it was.
Life is back to normal at the Alexander household these days. There are soccer games to watch, dinners to be shared, grace to be said. But Dr. Alexander says he's on a mission now.
I hope to tell my story to everyone I possibly can around this world, because I think it will help this world to be a much better place.
Dr. Alexander, just let me bring him to the tape. Welcome, Dr. Alexander. It's an extraordinary story, that for the world. There's a lot of people. I'm a physicist, but, I became a fan of you, really, and also spent years in healthcare. Happy birthday to you. Anyway, welcome to MedBix Webcast.
Well, thank you, Ramana. It's very good to be here. I appreciate your having me on today. And it was interesting to see that. I haven't watched that video again in many years. And it's amazing how everything just comes back so completely. They did a good job of kind of sharing my story and where I was at that point.
Yes, very good. So, my brother, actually, you don't know that a few months ago, my brother died with a bacterial meningitis. He passed away. He went to some temple, and then he came back and he fell ill and he passed away within a day. So, that I wanted to ask you about you're an expert in consciousness. You wrote a book on consciousness. When I think about my brother, there's a picture comes in my brain. Where is this picture? You're a neurosurgeon. I wanted to ask you, where is this picture is located? How it is stored? Do you have some idea about that, in fact?
I'm sorry, have an idea of what?
How this my brother's image is stored in the brain? Is it how the memory is mediated in the brain itself? How do your sister, for example, if you think about your sister, it comes in your brain some kind of image. Where that image is stored in the brain?
I would say they're not stored in the brain. I mean, that's something we actually discuss in a lot of detail in my third book, the one that was co-written with my life partner, Karen Newell, the book Living in a Mindful Universe, where we discuss all the evidence that memory doesn't seem to be stored in the brain at all. Neurosurgeons have suspected that for quite some time because out of all the brain resections, more than 1 million brain resections done over the last century, there's never been a case where any brain resection resulted in the deletion of a large swathe of long-term memories. So, and we go into detail of the history of it in Living in a Mindful Universe, the work of Wilder Penfield and others, and just a lot of the current evidence. But what it does is it points us to the fact that neither conscious awareness nor memory are actually resident, long-term memory are actually resident in the physical brain. And I think that's a very important point to make. It's a tough pill to swallow for a materialist neuroscientist who wants to think, well, obviously the brain does everything that the mind does, so you've got to explain it all through brain. Well, no, that's just not the way it works. We need a much bigger theater of operation and understanding to really get where consciousness and memory reside, but they're not physically resident in the brain itself.
So consciousness is not an emergent property of the brain. It is independent. You're saying that somewhere there, universal consciousness, we tap into that consciousness like a radio tap into the music. Is that your
Right.
interpretation?
And then the brain, the position of philosophically would be called, the simplest way to put it is objective idealism or analytical idealism. These are ways of saying that basically mind is primary in the universe and that all the physical universe emerges from that mental realm. And I think that's probably the better way of putting it. And then the brain is working as a filter that simply allows a restricted stream of that primordial consciousness, that universal mind that we're all sharing, is restricted in some ways by the physical brain to an individual. But one of the biggest lessons from near-death experiences is that when we die, when our consciousness and our soul, I would say, is leaving the physical body, it's not shrunken down and goes to zero as a materialist would postulate. It actually expands. Our conscious awareness becomes much greater when we leave the physical body. We reunite with higher soul. We reunite with the souls of departed loved ones, expand into that realm, that heavenly realm that I described. And again, here it's not, that one religion has it right. In fact, I'd say no religion has it just right, but that the whole world of near-death experiences offer us a tremendous light of wisdom in which to interpret this whole discussion. And I think that's the more important thing to recognize here. This primacy of consciousness, the unity of mind, is something that's very well demonstrated through these kind of experiences. And that's why in an NDE, people will often have a mind meld with people who are still living on Earth. They will connect with people who are still alive. They will also connect simultaneously with souls of departed loved ones who have left the physical plane. So basically, that mental layer of the universe is a layer of information, assimilation, and integration to which all of us have access. And we normally think when we're in the material world in our bodies that our conscious awareness is our own and it's isolated from others. And yet in these extreme cases, for example, in a near death or a shared death experience, shared death is just like near death in terms of the qualities of it, but a shared death experience usually happens in a very healthy person. Say a relative of someone who's dying. And it doesn't matter if they're 1,000 miles away, because in the spiritual realm, distance is not an impediment. And so a mother dying can come through, her soul can come through to a child, for example, and take them even to a full-blown life review before the bystander soul comes back to this world. That's called a shared death experience. And they witness the same kind of things that are witnessed in a near-death experience. But you don't have that ready explanation of somebody whose physiology has been so dramatically altered they're trying to die. Because in a shared death experience, most of those people are quite healthy, and yet they have the same kind of thing. But it's showing us that the mental realm is interconnected and that we're all sharing that one mind. That's really where the modern scientific community, the philosophical and medical communities are going on this, is a much richer understanding of this kind of primordial consciousness that is shared by us and not created by the workings of the physical brain itself.
Very interesting. So what is, if it is a universal consciousness, you're saying, what is that what is exactly consciousness, Dr. Alexander?
Well, I would say that the consciousness in that sense of the primordial mind is basically a living, breathing, existing of kind of process of information processing. It's active, and it basically is using this incredible dance of all these sentient beings that are going through their lives and interacting with each other. And it's using it in such a way that it results in basically the transformation or evolution of all of consciousness itself. In other words, that primordial mind is something that is evolving. It is using this this incredible drama of all these sentient beings existing in this universe in all their many different forms. And it's using that to grow, to basically learn about self. I mean, it's basically that the self-awareness of the universe is a property that exists within that mental layer. And that is something that we have access to. And that is what starts to then explain so many of these kind of human phenomena that are described. And so the scientific community, like I was before my coma, that would try to reject all this and just debunk this kind of information. Well, now with working models, we can bathe in this information and let it help us shape our understanding of a much richer, deeper universe and a more interconnected universe than we might have ever thought before. Before acknowledging that these kind of experiences show us something very deep and profound about our existence.
Consciousness in physics is basically when you have a double slit experiment, the wave function collapse is that you have to have an observer. Without an observer, there is observed and observer are important roles in physics. So a consciousness is the physicists did not like it, but they had to accept that consciousness has to be there because of the double slit experiment. It is forcing them to accept that it collapses in the brain, that observer makes a difference. Sometimes some scientists, some neuroscience scientists, some physicists try to reduce the consciousness into reducible into the constituents and parts. Do you think is it possible to reduce into the mathematical or reducible in physical kind of concepts?
Yes, you cannot reduce the mind and consciousness down to the physiological workings of the brain. It doesn't work. And we go into tremendous detail in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, to describe, why that is. What is the scientific evidence? And for example, we spend many chapters in our book talking about the consilience, that is the agreement of major lines of inquiry that tell us that the consciousness is fundamental in the universe and connected. So these lines of evidence include things like the hard problem of consciousness in neuroscience, which was actually put forward in the mid-1990s by David Chalmers, an Australian philosopher. But in fact, it is an impossible problem for materialist science to try and explain. And we go into that in detail in the book. Now, then there's also philosophy of mind and what's called the binding problem. And that is the apparent unity of consciousness within an individual. That is, how come that, I'm sitting here and in my consciousness, I'm aware of of past memory. I'm aware of everything that I can see, everything I can hear, I can think and reflect on past memories. I can use executive function of my frontal lobes in predicting what's going to happen in the very near future. So all of these things, everything I smell and touch and sense of body position in space, and projecting the future, as I said, all these things are unified. And if you're trying to explain that as a materialist neuroscientist who believe these are all separate neuronal populations contributing to that one, unified consciousness, it's very challenging to see how that would work, as opposed to realizing that if the brain is serving as a filter for a unified consciousness, of course, that consciousness appears unified as it's presented to us. It's not coming at us in these pieces of various neuronal populations, but it's one unified, present, existent moment. And I think that's very important to get, is that consciousness is this more universal thing. Now, so that's neuroscience hard problem, and that's philosophy of mind and the binding problem. But then you have, for example, quantum physics, which for more than a century now has been screaming at us that mind is primordial, that conscious awareness is something that exists primarily not derivative from the material of the brain. And so quantum physics in its own way has helped to really drive this notion of the one mind. And then, of course, you have all the evidence for non-local consciousness out of the world of parapsychology. So, for example, the evidence for telepathy. Guy Leon Playfair's book on twin telepathy, basically he makes the argument and states the empirical evidence that 35% of identical twins have profound telepathic experiences in their life. They're pretty routine. So telepathy is a very real phenomenon. Then you've got things like precognition, presentiment. Scientifically, you can show that people know the immediate future in certain computer image models of seconds in advance. And not only that, but their autonomic nervous system, in something called presentiment, can also register what is coming from a computer in such a paradigm, even before the random number generator in the computer has selected the image to present. That kind of evidence. And then you've got psychokinesis, the ability of people to manipulate matter with their mind at a distance. That's also been scientifically studied. And then, of course, all the other parapsychological evidence in near-death experiences, shared death experiences, after-death communications, deathbed visions, and of course, that tremendous literature, scientific literature on reincarnation. If you go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, you'll find that over the last 6 decades, they've studied more than 2,700 cases of children with memories of past lives. And they have 1,700 of those cases have been solved. That is, yes, they actually found the person described by the child actually existed. That literature is very rich and deep, and scientific community in many ways accepts and marvels at that data, even though, hardcore materialists or hardcore militant atheists will refuse all that data. But that's their problem. If you don't follow the data, sooner or later, you're just going to lead yourself into a falsehood of some nature or another. So why not follow the data and try and get to the truth? But the consilience, that is the agreement of all this evidence on non-local consciousness from parapsychology, from neuroscience hard problem, the philosophy of mind, and quantum physics, we go into great detail in Living in a Mindful Universe, how all of that adds up to a realization of the primacy of consciousness in the universe, and that we are sharing that one mind.
In physics, there's a black hole complementarity principle by Leonard Susskind. What he's saying that if somebody falls is trying to fall in the black hole, in the event horizon, usually they incinerate into the firewall. They become ash because it burns them. But the person who is falling into the black hole, they don't know the difference. They fall into the without any problems. So it is a very conflicting, is a complementarity. Is the person dies there into ashes. The other one is the person who is falling into it has no difference for them. This is called complementarity principle. That means only soul has to exist. That is the only way that can fall into the black hole is a complementarity. Is a principle, is a ER equal to EPR, is one of these things that is supports your. Bernardo Kastrup is a computer engineer. You're one of your forward guy. He wrote about it's impossible to, the only that exists is a consciousness, impossible to deduct or reduce into the parts of consciousness. That you have a lot more people, and there are some skeptics in the physics world, in the neuroscience world. There are skeptics, but the true science is focusing on there have to be existing in the consciousness. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Doctor, what is so? Do you believe in this conscious world? What is the reincarnation means?
Well, I think that there is some aspect of us that comes back to be born again. And it turns out that the system, whatever it is, goes through a lot of effort not to allow us to necessarily bring those memories fully into this lifetime. And that's why, for example, Dr. Ian Stevenson and Dr. Jim Tucker, they're the two scientists who've done most of that reincarnation work out of UVA. But they basically insist you better harvest these memories before age 5 or 6, because the children tend to forget them. And even children who had very profound past life memories, at age 3 and 4, by age 5 or 6, they'll say, "What are you talking about? I don't remember that." So it's a process that I call programmed forgetting. But what it means is that somehow the universe is able to kind of slowly delete or cover over those memories we may harvest from past lives and between lives. And that's just the way it works. And that's why most of us, when we hear this about past life memories in children, we say, well, no, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't have such memories. But remember, program forgetting is very real. And I think what it does, the overall effect of program forgetting, is it tends to give us more skin in the game for this existence. And it tends to make us focus more on living this life. And, working through the hardships, difficulties, challenges we have, all our interactions with our fellow beings, and trying to grow as best we can in our knowledge and understanding of our relationship with the universe. But for whatever reason, that program forgetting is there. Now, it turns out that in some ways that can be reversed. For example, people can have a near-death experience. And that can allow them to then recall some of those memories from past lives and between lives. It can also be obtained through hypnotic regression, through meditation. I mean, there are many different ways we can uncover those memories. But for most of us who are just busy living our lives in this world, we're not necessarily so interested in accessing all those past lives. Although the whole world of transpersonal psychology, which is based on the work of, say, Carl Jung, Stan Grof, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, and others, points out that to best understand the issues that an individual might have in this life, it's best to understand the journey that their soul has been on other lifetimes, because that will help you to explain more of the issues they're facing in this lifetime and to come to proper analysis and correction and kind of learning and living through those issues to really grow into the soul we came here to be. But it's an astonishing body of evidence once you realize it's there, and you realize that probably all of us have lived before, even though I think some souls are obviously much newer, more self-focused, kind of greedy, selfish than others, and the more advanced souls who've been here many a time are altruistic, philanthropic. Many of them are very saintly. They're here basically to help the rest of humanity climb out of this abyss that we've kind of buried ourselves in.
Hindus believe in reincarnation, but in Buddhism differed a little bit different. What it said that the life and death cycle should exist if you should cease to exist if you truly believe in nirvana. So it's kind of a little bit of reincarnation things Buddha did not buy. Do you? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think that, I mean, the scientific evidence is there. When you read these 1,000 cases out of University of Virginia, or look at the work of Jim Matlock or Carol Bowman or other people who study this scientifically, um, there's no way of denying that there is some way that we come into this world, and by and large, you can easily demonstrate that some people who come into this world have very strong memories of a life that they've lived before. And then when you do the homework, you'll find that somebody actually lived before that fits that description. So I don't know where you want to go with that, but the empirical facts are clear in their own right. It's not like you can say, oh no, nobody's ever reincarnated. That's nonsense, because the 2,700 investigated cases, 1,700 solved, deny that and say, no, you just don't know what you're talking about. If you haven't looked into this, why should you expect to know anything more than the average person on the street? This is from people who have worked on these things for decades. Very rigorous, tough work, because, remember, it all began back in the 1960s, long before the internet. So it was big, hard homework once a child had described a past life, to do all the necessary digging to find out if that person actually lived. But to have 1,700 cases where, yes, the person lived, and there's no other way that the child could have come into that knowledge, which is, of course, what they have to prove. The scientists who investigate this have to show there's no fraud, no deceit. And especially in the era of the internet, that has become a challenge. But the reality is, when you get young children, it's a pretty clean story, because when they're really young, and especially if the experts get in there to question them at the very beginning, before adults have started putting thoughts in their heads, you start getting these very clean cases that are crystal clear. Yes, this soul has been here before. They lived a life that, in fact, contributes to, in this lifetime, it can contribute to their phobias, to their fears. It can contribute to their behaviors. And they certainly have very active memories of having lived that life. So it's not just that somehow they, telepathically derived this information from another soul that lived at some time. But in fact, they live it like, my God, I lived that life, and now my behavior shows that. And I think the important differentiation here, though, is a lot of what I look at as reincarnation in this setting, in this kind of description, is one where the goal is actually we improve as we go through multiple iterations of this, and that, in fact, it's filled with the concept of grace, that we're growing, that all of consciousness is transforming. So it's a little different from what I would say is, for example, a Buddhist interpretation of reincarnation, which is to get off the wheel and get to nirvana. This is much more of becoming one with the divine force of God over multiple lifetimes, coming into that kind of sainthood. So I would say it's not a mindless mechanistic wheel and the goal is to escape it, but that, in fact, this process of coming back again and again is a process of refinement in our understanding and knowledge that leads us towards oneness with the divine over multiple lifetimes.
Let me introduce you. Brandon Kriegel is my son's classmate. They grew up together. Brandon went to Harvard, actually, business school. So
excellent.
Brandon, I was teaching them quantum physics when they were like 14. My kid and his. So Brandon is always fascinated by these kind of things. Hey, Brandon, do you have any questions to Dr. Alexander?
Yeah, very, very nice to meet you, Doctor.
Good to meet you too, Brad.
Thanks for having me. Yes, thank you for having me, Ramana. And it's such a robust topic. And yeah, the ABC interview gives it a lot of context, and you now have 3 books. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes,
you have 3 books now
on this particular topic. Yes,
on this topic. Wow, congrats.
Yeah.
Well, my bibliography is available on ebenalexander.com. In the information about me, you can see I've written more than 150 scientific papers based mainly in neurosurgery, but of course the more recent papers are all about consciousness and this experience. And I've also written several other books, but these are the 3 books: Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. They're the three books that I've written about this particular topic, consciousness and my near-death experience and what it's shown me about our understanding of the brain-mind connection.
So, Dr. Alexander, this is a new thing now in the computer world. This is I'm from technology. I'm from physics. I don't buy this argument. This computer artificial intelligence, they think it is almost like a consciousness we can create. We can simulate the consciousness. What do you think of that? Their claim?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, just about all the AI that's out there is really just expert systems. It's digital computers that have a massive amount of memory, very high CPU speed, and massive memory and massive speed can give you the illusion of, a very smart human being. That's why Deep Blue, the IBM computer, was able to win chess championships. But it doesn't do it by being smart and conscious and self-reflective. It does it by being able to project, billions of potential moves into the future and then pick the best one of the billions. And it can do it so fast and so efficiently that it looks smart and intelligent. But that has nothing to do with being self-aware. And I think, to me, there's not even the remotest clue of true self-awareness in any machines out there in AI. So forget about it. And it's a shame that some people get misled by that simplicity and assume that, like if you pass the Turing test, the Turing test is that if you're on a keyboard and you're communicating with a computer, but it could be on the other end is not a computer, but a human being. And you ask it questions and you quiz it and you try and decide, is the entity on the other end communicating with me, is that a computer or is it an actual intelligent, self-aware person? And the Turing test can easily be done to look like a human being, but that doesn't mean it's self-aware. And that's where I think that's the big giant mystery here. In fact, so much of what we're talking about here is that self-awareness. I wish that Rene Descartes, when he said, "I think, therefore I am," several centuries ago, had said, "I'm aware of my thoughts and therefore I am," because the thoughts themselves are not the magic. It's the awareness of the thought. That is the deep, profound mystery. And that is the true mystery of consciousness, is that awareness. And it turns out, I would say that self-awareness is a property of the universe, this primordial mind, how self-awareness. But that's something that we have access to. And that's where we can glean tremendous information. That's why I love meditation. I love going within. And what I do in meditation is I take that little voice in my head. A lot of people, the voice in the head is what they identify with. But remember, as Michael Singer puts it in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate. And I think that's a very key concept, because that little voice in your head is nothing more than a parlor trick. It has nothing to do with the deep and profound magic of consciousness and self-awareness. To start to answer that, you have to dive much, much deeper. And that's where we go in Living in a Mindful Universe. That's where a lot of these discussions go in discussing the mind-brain relationship, how the brain works as a filter, and this primordial consciousness. So there's a lot to be said about how all that works. But I think the scientific community, in many ways, is getting on board with this. And there are two groups that I highly recommend people refer to. These are groups that I work with, scientific groups, and you can learn a lot more if you go to their websites. So GalileoCommission.org is one, and the other is scientificandmedical.net. And those two websites contain a lot of information about a scientific revolution that is in process right now, that ultimately will be putting consciousness as fundamental and primary in the universe, and pointing out how the physical universe, or the apparent physical universe, is only emergent from that mental realm, that primordial mind. And the best news about all this is it tremendously awakens humanity to our potential. Because in fact, the materialist science that I worshiped before my coma, and I cannot use that word strongly enough, because that materialist science is a faith-based religion that has less to support it than many of the faith-based religion. And that's why a quantum-informed science of consciousness is replacing it. And that is one where objective idealism is very much in the cards as a way to explain all this. And the best news about that is it reopens the possibility for our free will, because materialist science will scoff at you if you claim to have free will. They say it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, that we're all just chemical reactions, and we have this illusion of being aware and of free will, that we have a will to change the universe. And they say it's false. But what I will tell you is that with this quantum-informed science of consciousness that is currently emerging, we are just beginning to discover the power of our free will. And the kind of examples that I would often use for that part of the discussion is beginning with placebo effect, which has been honored by medical science for the last 6 decades as the gold standard for assessing any new treatment modality. And placebo effect is nothing more than an admission by medical scientists that our thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes can play a tremendous role in our healing. But when you move beyond placebo effect to things like spontaneous remission, go to noetic.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, put in the search term spontaneous remission. You'll uncover a book that they wrote in the mid-1990s with more than 3,500 cases of people who healed their own cancer, their own advanced infection, things like that, beyond any medical intervention. And then, of course, you can go right to the real gold standard of miraculous healing and near-death experiences. For example, in my story, I told my story, my medical story in Proof of Heaven, but there were 3 doctors who were fascinated by my recovery, went through all my medical records and wrote a medical case report, which greatly strengthened everything I said in Proof of Heaven about my brain was incapable of having any dream or hallucination. And likewise, my very recovery from that illness is so surprising and unexpected. It's unprecedented in the medical literature. And yet that case report was published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2018. And in fact, when the peer review editors of that scientific journal challenged those 3 doctors who wrote the case report, saying, how do you explain it? This case is absurd. No one this sick from bacterial meningoencephalitis ends up having a full recovery. And that's when the 3 doctors who wrote the case report said, well, it's because he had a near-death experience that he was able to muster this apparently miraculous recovery. And
I remember you were telling me last time, it's actually not that I came alive, but I fully recovered from that. That is a miracle itself. You said that last time.
But I'm not alone. I mean, there are other near-death experiences that are known in the medical literature, like Anita Morjani. She had an advanced stage 4B lymphoma and was deep in coma, 85 pounds. She should have been dead within 6 hours. That was in February 2006. She had a profound near-death experience. She ended up, mind melding with her brother, who was flying from India to Hong Kong to be with her as she died. She mind melded with her father, who left. He died years earlier, and yet she had this beautiful meeting with him. And she came back to this world knowing that the lymphoma would disappear, which it did. She's alive and well today, giving talks. Likewise, the case of Mary C. Neal, the orthopedic surgeon who wrote To Heaven and Back. She had a profound near-death experience kayaking in Chile back in the late 1990s.
Yes.
In this accident, her kayak went deep underwater. Her legs were broken under a boulder. She was underwater more than 30 minutes in a warm water drowning. Anybody in medicine knows you don't come back from that. She actually was brought to the surface dead. They resuscitated her, and she went through a long, many-month recovery, but ended up having a complete recovery, going back to work as an orthopedic surgeon, and then also going around the world like I do, giving talks on her spiritual experience. These cases are out there, and what they show us, these dramatic spiritual journeys in the setting of profound healing, that's the big clue, people. This is all about becoming more whole and coming into healing in our lives. And I think that the more we become aware of these kind of powers and of this broader aspect of the universe, the more we can all participate in bringing ourselves into wholeness and healing.
Brandon, do you have any comments so far?
Yeah, just like a lot of information. I'm trying to wrap my head around a lot of the viewers, I'm sure, are in the same bucket. But I'm kind of like thinking about where the images, and so I know a little bit about neuroscience just from reading from Ray Kurzweil and other like neuroscientists and stuff. I think basically, like, from my understanding, it's like associative based, and like neurons and synapses, like you kind of like build new associations that come from old ones. And it's kind of interesting what you were saying about how the images aren't necessarily stored in the brain, as like the memories aren't necessarily stored physically in the brain. That kind of like stuck out with me, and I'm like, wrapping my head around that and exploring that. And one thing that I was thinking is that it could be, and kind of like you're alluding to this one mind, kind of like one consciousness that connects everyone. And so like I'm kind of thinking like, okay, like, I don't know, one thing that popped into my head is like this quantum entanglement that just came out. So you can see like how like these particles are like totally entangled throughout many, like distance doesn't matter. And so maybe like the observations are like entangled, so that they can be like recreated and like somewhat, or and so that maybe that's like that connection, like the individual observations and like the mind observations. I'm trying to like wrap my head around that. But
Well, it's a difficult. All this is kind of tough if you insist on looking at it from a purely materialist perspective. If your assumption is, well, the brain must be creating consciousness, how does it do that? You can follow a lot of breadcrumbs along those pathways, but ultimately you end up running into major problems. As I said, trying to explain near-death experiences, shared death experiences, psychokinesis, remote viewing, the ability to discern information across space and time. Remote viewing has been very well proven, and what that is scientifically proven. But all these things are just showing us that consciousness is not just local, created, in our skull, between our ears, in this warm, dark bath, but that consciousness and conscious awareness is much grander than that. And that's really where we have to get into it. And quantum physics, the reason it is so relevant in this discussion is that every single, according to modern neuroscience, every single kind of thought, perception, awareness, any piece of consciousness you can talk about is dependent on neurons. Neurons are quantum computers. John C. Eccles, a Nobel laureate in neurophysiology, a brilliant scientist, wrote a book in the early 1980s where he talked about the mind and its brain. And what he did was he talked about the whole discussion of ion channels and the physics involved in ion channels and whether a neuron fires, and how that activation energy is less than the quantum uncertainty principle would dictate for a neuron. And so, in other words, there is plenty of room to have a neuron fire or not fire based on conditions that are at an energy regime that is so small that it's not determined just by what's going on here in the material realm. That's the important thing to get. I know it sounds kind of complicated, and how do we make sense of this? How is this mind over matter? Or how is this primordial mind actually interfacing with me and using that brain as basically a veiling function, and the brain is a filter? How those details we need to work out. But the trace that mind is actually running matter is that very fact that you don't have to violate laws of conservation of energy to determine whether or not a neuron fires, because as John C. Eccles showed so well, the energy regime is well within the confines, so that fire or not fire is not even determined here in this material realm, but is down in that tiny little energy regime of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle applied to those neurons. That's where this whole thing of objective idealism and that mind running this emergent reality, including us, can work. And that's the important thing to get, is that because neurons are quantum computers fully in the realm where mind can work over matter, that's where we need to be focusing in terms of understanding how human beings actually function and this mind-brain connection works, but doesn't require that the information be locally stored in the physical substance of the brain.
I attended a seminar in Palo Alto, in Stanford, in fact, near Stanford. There was a physicist, a Taggart, I forgot his name exactly. He was a part of the Defense Department of Defense remote viewing. He wrote a book on it. That ESP book, the book on ESP.
I think
He's
it's
a
Russell
corporate-
Targ. Does that sound right?
yes,
Russell Targ? Yeah.
yes. I
A lot of
attended his
work with
lecture.
you.
And he was talking about how closely they came to really remote viewing they did. Is a physicist talking about it, how closely he copied that on the desk of someone, the picture, they actually exactly repeated that here. That is a fascinating thing for me at the time. I was listening in the right near Stanford, they were talking about it. But Brandon is talking about a one mind, Dr. Alexander. If it is a one mind, Bernardo Kastrup says that we are, because we have some kind of a disease, a dissociative disorder, identity disorder, that is causing for all of us to think that we are separate. What do you think of that?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Can you just get back to the question again? And part of that broke up on me here.
Bernardo Kastrup says that about one mind, we are all one mind. The reason
Right.
we think we are separate from each other, the reason is there is a dissociative disorder, identity dissociative disorder it calls.
Right.
Is some kind of a individualness comes out of this consciousness, a private consciousness, that because of that reason we think we are separate, but we are not separate. That's what he's saying.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. I missed the word separate. Good. That helps a lot. Yeah. Very, very well put. I mean, Bernardo is he's a big supporter of Living in a Mindful Universe, of our book, and we certainly have endorsed a lot of his work. He's a very brilliant computer scientist and philosopher, and I highly recommend his work. But that's he's really kind of hitting the nail on the head. It's a form of dissociation. And that's what needs to be worked out, is what is the mechanism of that dissociation. But what it's doing is basically splitting that one mind into the isolated pieces that seem to be us. Now, of course, he's taking that model from the world of psychiatry, because within an individual, there are cases where they seem to have dissociation within themselves, so that they can have separate personalities kind of running them. And in some of the most interesting cases I've heard along those lines, for example, there was a case reported in Germany a few years ago where one of the alters, and the alter is the name for an individual piece of that dissociation, but one of the alters was blind. And interestingly enough, when they did functional MRI in this woman, when the alter was in play, who was blind, her functional MRI looked like someone who was blind. Her occipital cortex did not light up at all to visual stimuli. And yet when she was another alter that was sighted, the functional MRI would show her occipital lobes working just fine for a sighted person. So this whole dissociation thing is really pretty major. We don't really understand how it works, but I know Bernardo has really a long way with using that dissociation model to explain how a primordial consciousness dissociates into each one of us, and each one in different lifetimes, etc. And I love his work, and I highly recommend it. And I think there's a lot to that dissociation. From my point of view as a neuroscientist, I just want to learn a lot more about how it works. I want the details. I want the mechanism. And that's what I think all of us are really seeking, is that deep, profound mechanism. But the important thing to remember here is, if you just approach it from the viewpoint of what we can study, functional MRI, magnetoencephalography, etc., you're going to fool yourself into thinking that those are the tools I will use to get to the answer. Well, guess what? There are many examples. I'll give an example of the papers over the last 10 years on psychedelics, on psilocybin, and papers in which people are using functional MRI, magnetoencephalography to look at the workings of the brain under the influence of psilocybin. or LSD, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, what have you. And what they find is the brain goes dark. The brain is getting out of the way. So if you're trying to use your functional MRI to get how these things are working, you're going to be very frustrated, because when you look at the brain on fMRI on psilocybin, the default mode network, which is deeply responsible for our sense of self and identity, dissolves. It disappears. And so you're not going to be able to trace brain activity with that magnetoencephalography or functional MRI, because the brain is actually getting out of the way. The brain is not doing that work of giving you that phenomenal experience of those psychedelic substances. We have to reach deeper. So in other words, I'm just telling you, expand the theater of operations of what you think is going on. But if you're trying to pretend it's all just brain creating consciousness locally, forget it. You're going to run into a lot of cul-de-sacs and dead ends that don't give you a deeper answer. The truth lies beyond all that. We need a much bigger theater of operations to understand it. And that's where medicalandscientific.net, GalileoCommission.org, and other scientific groups that I work with are struggling to get to that next level, because that's where we'll come to a deeper understanding of how objective idealism in the brain and the filter works so effectively to give us this apparent reality.
I'm going to deviate from a little bit different subject. Yesterday, there was a big announcement that the nuclear fusion, is a nuclear fusion created unbounded energy that is in the Lawrence Livermore lab. But they created physics is the mother of all sciences, So you think what is I strongly feel that, we are trying to solve the problem of healthcare challenges we could not able to solve so far. You think physics is a good solution what is your opinion? Physics is going to be a solution for the healthcare challenges that we are facing right now?
Well, for healthcare challenges, I think, I mean, that's a giant question, and I don't know that I have any kind of a ready answer. I mean, for healthcare challenges, to me, the most obvious thing is that we have a lot of power to heal ourselves. And to come into spiritual alignment can help us come much more into wholeness and healing. And so I'm personally a gigantic fan of meditation and centering prayer for use in healing self and others. Now, there's no question in my mind that modern medicine has brought a lot of beautiful benefits to the table. But ultimately, I've come to realize, especially because of my own experience with meningoencephalitis and then coming back from that, that we can play a much greater role in our own healing and wholeness. And that's where I think the world of kind of healing and healthcare can really come into some dramatic improvement. And that's a lot of the work that Karen and I do in our workshops, our meditation workshops. Karen Newell is my life partner. She is the co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe. And we do a lot of meditation workshops to help people get into deep meditative states using sacred acoustics. It's a form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And I became fascinated with binaural beat brainwave entrainment more than 11 years ago, when I knew I had to start meditating if I wanted to understand more about consciousness, but I needed a powerful tool. And I heard about this binaural beat brainwave entrainment, and it was something, it's a phenomenon that was discovered in the 1800s. In the late 20th century, they found that binaural beats could greatly enhance people's out-of-body experiences and remote viewing. And to me, that was enough to tell me, go for it. Learn more about sacred acoustics and binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And I dove into it. And I think it's been tremendously helpful to me at coming to a deeper understanding of the mind-brain connection. A lot of the work I've done in the 14 years since my coma is reflected in meditation. And so for people who want to learn a lot more about that, I would highly recommend sacredacoustics.com. And also for the follow-up information concerning my journey since the book Proof of Heaven came out, important to point out that there's now a 10th anniversary edition of the book Proof of Heaven, and it has 36 additional pages. And those 36 pages go into a lot of detail of much of what's happened in the 14 years since my coma. That covers a lot of the scientific ground and certainly a lot of the deeper understanding. So.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. It is truly an honor for me to talk with you. You're American treasure, and not only India, the world treasure you are. In fact, you opened a new way of thinking, a new way of understanding life, and you shed a light on the new things. Certainly. Give a final word to Brandon. You say anything final?
Well, Brandon, I am so happy to see you and people of your generation taking an interest in this kind of thing. This world is in deep trouble because of the false sense of separation that comes from materialist thinking. And a much more unified, quantum informed science of consciousness will help all of us to realize we're interconnected. The binding force of love is very important. And the more we can show kindness, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, and of course, gratitude at every step of the way, the more this world will improve dramatically. And I think your generation can take this lead and run with it and make this world a far better place. So congratulations. I look forward to what you and your generation will do. I'm sorry for what my generation has done with our addiction to fossil fuels and toxic plastics and all that. But thank God your generation is coming along just in the nick of time to save us from the insanity of materialist thought, which has dominated my generation for far too long.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for that.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Dr. Alexander. It is truly an honor. Thank you.
Well,
bye, all. Bye.
Yes, thank you all. Very nice meeting with you, and thank you for getting this out.
We are retelling their stories through our patented designs that can be worn on scrubs, t-shirts, printed on conference bags, and endless other promotional materials. Daily Wear for Medicine is the first ever of its kind to create curiosity in medicine through visual art. We at MedBricks are celebrating unsung heroes of the past who made enormous contributions to the field of medicine through our unique campaign called Daily Wear for Medicine. You can wear it, carry it, and give it.